Hello and welcome to the Dismantle Racism Show. I'm your host, the Reverend Dr. TLC. The goal of our show is to educate, eradicate, and dismantle racism because we really do want to create a world where racial equity exists for everyone. We want to create a world that's more loving and kind and compassionate to one another. And we do that one step at a time. The more you hear from my guests in terms of the ways in which they've found to bring the world together, the better able you are to figure out what you can do to dismantle racism, to create love in the world and to create harmony in the world. It is so important that we hear one another's stories so that we know how to take action and we know how to heal the world. I want to invite you, if you would, to please make sure that you subscribe to the show. I love that you listen to it, but I want you to subscribe and I want you to tell other people about the show. Please make sure that you visit sacredintelligence.com as well so that you can learn a little bit more about me. You can pick up a copy of my book, Dismantling Racism, Healing Separation from the Inside Out. And as always, I want to remind you that this work that we do requires us to create a space for us to be centered and grounded in this work, which is why I begin each episode with a meditation. And so accompanying my book are meditations that are based on the meditations at the beginning of each chapter. They're ways to help you ground yourself for the difficult conversations. I've used them when I do my trainings because whenever I am talking about difficult conversations and racism, and then release it. And then one more time, just take a deep breath in. Hold it and release it. And as you begin to find your normal rhythm, I want to invite you to think about your breath as reminding you that within you is divine wisdom, is your sacred intelligence. It's that part of you that helps you to manifest your greatness while helping others to do the same. Is that part of you that helps you to make good choices that will not only benefit you, but will benefit those around you. Your breath reminds you of that sacred intelligence that will help you to set boundaries, that will help you to define what is good for you, that will remind you to be careful about what you do to yourself, what you allow others to do to you, and what you do to others. Just breathe in and out, remembering that we're all interconnected. I am because we are because I am. We are not an island, and we exist because of one another. We're all divine and loving beings. And when it boils down to it, we all want the same thing in life: safety, security, love, respect, kindness. So just breathe in and out and recognize that you are love itself and you are loved. And you have the capacity to spread that love to others. Breathe in and out and connect with all those who came before you, all those who are here to support you now. I always feel so much better as I do that. I am really excited about today's show because really we are going to be talking about the wall between. And when I think about it, I think about the wall that exists between us, no matter whether we are looking at our differences racially, ethnically, in terms of our age, our gender, whatever we consider. For Jews, Israel must exist. For Palestinians, the historic injustice being committed since 1948 must be reversed. Neither wants to know why the other cannot budge on the issues. The wall is up. These responses emanate primarily from the two meta-narratives of Jews and Palestinians, the Holocaust and the Nakba. Virtually every response to the struggle from a member of either community can be traced back to issues of identity, trauma, and victimhood as they relate to their respective meta-narratives. I could go on and on and on about this book, but I do want to tell you this. The purpose of this book is to lead towards healing. It is a guide for anyone who wants to open up to new possibilities within the Israel-Palestine discourse in the West. And so I'm excited today to welcome the authors to the show. Raja Khouri is the CEO of Khouri Conversations, a human rights and inclusion consultant, the founding president of the Canadian Arab Institute, board member at Project Rosanna in Canada, and a former 10-year commissioner with the Ontario Human Rights Commission. He is Canada Committee member of Human Rights Watch and co-founder of the Canadian Arab Jewish Leadership Dialogue Group. And Dr. Jeffrey Wilkinson is an American Jew who lives in Canada. He holds a doctorate in education from the University of Toronto and works actively in the Jewish community and beyond on issues relating to trauma.
So long stories and short stories. The long story is I somehow ended up doing research on Israel-Palestine and how trauma and memory affected our discourse. And I did a doctorate on it. I was able to collect in Toronto a group of Palestinians and Jews and have them listen to each other's story. And Raja was one of my participants. He says that was actually, excuse me, he was one of my victims. And after the work was done, I was so wowed by his story, by his openness, by his ability to communicate his trauma and also see beyond it. That I felt we needed to do some more work together. And that led to us literally having, probably hundreds of hours of conversations around our stories and listening, usually over hummus and pita, and just really becoming engaged in who each other were and who our narratives. Our book is really not about two people, but about two stories.
Raja, do you want to jump in before our break?
Yeah, first I'd like to tell Jeff that I'm still one of his victims. It's not in the past. The trauma continues. Find there if we got to know each other a little bit more. And that started that journey. And that journey eventually, led me to, meet Jeff, and I was taken by his warmth and a search for the truth and for how I really felt about my past. And he asked me questions that drove me to memories that I hadn't dug into in a very long time. And that was the start of our work together.
Well, so we have to take a quick break, and I want to talk a bit about the trauma because I know that informs the work that you all do, and it's a part of the healing. And thank you, Raja, for really talking about the importance of finding the common ground, because I think that that's so important for any healing work that we do. But when we come back, though, before we talk about the trauma, I really want to hear from you all. What are some of the meta-narratives that continue to perpetuate this? I don't want to just say propaganda, but in some ways, yes, it is.
Are you a conscious co-creator? Are you on a quest to raise your vibration and your consciousness? I'm Sam Leibowitz, your conscious consultant, and on my show, The Conscious Consultant Hour Awakening Humanity, we will touch upon all these topics and more. Listen live at our new time on Thursdays at 12 noon Eastern Time. That's The Conscious Consultant Hour Awakening Humanity, Thursdays 12 noon on talkradio.nyc.
What really drives success in business? Introducing Intangify, the show that explores the intangible assets that create value and growth. I'm Matthew Asbell, your host and an attorney focused on innovation. Join me Fridays at noon Eastern to discover how innovation, culture, and other intangibles shape thriving companies from startups to established businesses. We'll share strategies to unleash your business's true potential. Tune in live on talkradio.nyc Fridays at noon Eastern and Intangify your business today. Talkradio.
You're listening to Talk Radio NYC. Uplift, educate, empower.
If you would, could you all just talk a little bit about the meta-narratives that exist for Jewish people and those that exist for Palestinians?
Sure. Did you want to start, Raja? Or yeah.
Sure. There is a very common meta-narrative to both of these communities, and that is victimhood. Jewish victimhood in the form of anti-Semitism has been around for centuries, even more, some people say. And of course, the Holocaust was the culmination of these centuries into this horrible attempt at basically wiping out the Jewish people in Europe. The Palestinian victimhood started essentially in 1948 with the establishment of Israel on what used to be Palestine or Palestinian land, and for Palestinians that was really, a loss of everything, a total dispossession. You didn't just lose your home, the land that you worked, but you lost your identity, you lost the society that you used to be in was completely destroyed and scattered all over the region. So when starts creeping into everything we think, everything we believe. I'll pass that on to Dr. Trauma here, Jeffrey Wilkinson, who taught me everything I know about trauma. So
well, I think Raja has described it beautifully. Three things probably to be able to start with. First, is to be able to separate victimhood from victimization. So victim is having something occur that was without your permission that caused you pain. That's real, substantial, you get it. Victimhood instead, not victimization, victimhood is a psychological, social psychological trauma of experiencing what has happened as now happening and almost guaranteed to happen again. So it is a reactive, usually non-consensual act of response to any event that triggers something from the past. So to feel victimized, to be in victimhood means to really be paralyzed to move forward. It means that the past informs your present, and therefore your future is completely guided by the past, not by the choices you're making today.
So what each of you are saying makes total sense, but the average person is not even cognizant that they have been traumatized, particularly by something that's happened in the past, even though we keep bringing it up. So how do
I'd like to make a note first about the fact that victimhood prevents you from realizing that you could be victimizing someone else. Because if you see yourself as a victim, then you're not able to see how you might be victimizing someone else. And as you know, the late Dr. Edward Said said once, he said, we Palestinians are refugees of refugees and victims of victims, referring to Palestinians and Jews in 1948. But go ahead.
Well,
Jeff.
so Raja, excuse me, Jeff, hold on to the question, because Raja, you said something and I need to, could you give us an example of ways that victims can become the victimizer?
Well, I mean, we know from human psychology that people who have been abused as children by their parents are likely to become abusers themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And in the case of Israel-Palestine, of course, the Jews were the victims of the Holocaust, and many Jews see themselves as having had no choice. They ran out of the burning building, jumped out of the window, and landed on the Palestinians.
On Raja, because we tag team like this all the time. This is absolutely perfect. So I was this morning I was thinking about a character we talk about in our book, a man named Maurice de Hirsch, who is a very wealthy Bavarian Jew in the mid and late 19th century. He had been able to make a deal with the Turks to build a railway from Europe into Russia, and got very, 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 very wealthy because of this. So wealthy that he knew, princes and kings, and so wealthy that he wanted to become a member of the Vienna Jockey Club, which he could easily purchase 12 times over, but he was denied membership because he was Jewish. Mm-hmm. So the essence of trauma and victimhood is, how do we translate this feeling of power and loss of power together at the same time? Mm-hmm. And a large point that I make to my Jewish community is that our greatest sort of area of trauma and discourse of not knowing how to move forward, you really asked, how do we move forward? Our greatest struggle, I would suggest, is how do we be both victim and victimizer? How do we intake the idea that what was done to us, we are doing to someone else? That is a wound on the psyche that is almost impossible to deal with, because to live as a victim is a very hard and some ways kind of familiar and comforting blanket. It's known, we expect it.
If you say you're pro-Palestinian, for instance, then you're anti-Semitic. Or if you say, so how do we begin to have the conversation if we say, listen, we're just concerned about human rights, like Raja said,
right,
without people feeling as if that means then you're anti. And I don't think it means one and the same. Just like when I am talking in this country about racism between white folks and people of color, just because I want equity for people of color, it doesn't mean that I want you necessarily to have less. I want you to still thrive, but I also want a piece of that. So when we come back, I really would love to hear how you have engaged in that conversation and what the reception has been. So we're going to be right back to continue our conversation. If you are on Facebook or YouTube right now and you want to comment, please comment so that we can hear what you're thinking about. We can get your questions to Raja and Jeffrey on the show. We're so grateful that you're here. We'll be right back with the Dismantle Racism Show. Are you passionate about the conversation around racism? Hi, I'm Reverend Dr. TLC, host of the Dismantle Racism Show, which airs every Thursday at 11 a.m. Eastern on talkradio.nyc. Join me and my amazing guests as we discuss ways to uncover, dismantle, and eradicate racism. That's Thursdays at 11 o'clock a.m. on talkradio.nyc.
message and tell their story. Listen each week at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time until 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time right here on talkradio.nyc.
You're listening to Talk Radio NYC at www.talkradio.nyc. Now broadcasting 24 hours a day.
We are back with the Dismantle Racism show. Jeffrey and Raja, I do want you all to jump in and particularly you, Jeffrey, to talk about how you have gotten Jewish people to engage in this conversation. When I was teaching at one of the local colleges and I had my students to do an exercise around working with a group that they had resistance towards, I had a Jewish student who had a resistance towards a particular group that was pro-Palestinian. And to her amazement, she was shocked when she got to the group and realized that most of the people in the group were Jewish. And so it opened her eyes to ways to start to think about the Palestinians a little bit differently. And she understood that just because you're pro-Palestinian doesn't mean that you're anti-Jewish. But she did that because there was a
mentally less human about them than us. And our conflict that we're talking about, our struggle here between Jews and Palestinians is really an affective polarization. It isn't a disagreement about stories or narratives. It is about threat. It's about danger. It's about the consequences of daily life on each. So I really want to just kind of talk about that for a minute. We target three particular ways that we talk to Jews and to Palestinians about how to move forward. The first is, we actually call it from many to one. So in any conversation like this with your student, as soon as the other becomes a single human. So when we talk about the Holocaust, when we talk about 6 million Jews, it's impossible for our brain to take that in. But instead, like in Steven Spielberg's Schindler's List, there's one little girl in a red coat. If we can get to know that one little girl in the red coat, and that was the only piece of color in the whole film, you know, all the rest of the film is black and white. We then have an opportunity to actually, to have a relational communication with the other. So I think that's the first really important thing. It's not 6 million Jews, it's one Jew 6 million times. It's not 750,000 Palestinians that were expelled from Palestine in 1948. It's one Palestinian expelled 750,000 times. And when feeling that resistance that happens right at the moment that you're telling or hearing a memory or story, it isn't the event is what happened over here. It's the memory or story that's keeping you stuck in your silo. So if we can have a curtain between the past and the present, then the choices we make going forward are based on now, not on then. So the way I talk about Palestinians, the way I demand justice for Palestinians, is not based on my family's loss and death in the Holocaust. It's actually based on my relationship with Raja. It's based on my knowing about what I know now. And so therefore my actions are different because they're not stuck in a prison.
So what it requires is people to step outside of what they know to change that meta narrative, because that's what you were talking about. Step outside what they know and form a relationship, which gets back to what Raja said in the very beginning, right?
Yes.
And what was the third thing?
The third one is to resist, violently resist groupthink.
Okay.
Our primary struggle in this milieu is that we listen to one story. And our brain, we're not bad people. Our brain is wired to the simple story, the simple story that makes sense. So complex stories, our brain doesn't like.
Right.
If we can
But some people might feel like they're dishonoring their ancestors by changing their story, because Jews always say, we will never forget, right? Isn't that the mantra? So if I now become friends with a Palestinian, or I now like have this complex story rather than the one story, am I dishonoring, my ancestors? And the other thing that's coming up for me as you're talking, I love how you are explaining trauma and bringing it to the present. It also makes me think about epigenetics, how our trauma is trapped in our bodies. And I'm wondering if there's any difference between any of that.
Right. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to say about, but I mean, that's a whole nother.
I know we probably need to.
The short version, to make the sort of the epigenetics argument simpler, is that we have intergenerational trauma. It is in our bloodstream. It is in our silo of tribalism. It is built in, and we have to recognize it. I think the point that you're making, and I'm sure Raja will expound on this because we've talked about this a lot, I think it's really important to get that this is not a zero-sum game. That my inclusion of Raja's story makes my story richer, makes it more interesting, makes it fuller. Now, did I have to go through some pain to get there? Did I have to give up some crap? Yeah, I did. But it was worth it. We have a short little 2-line poem in our book, and I'm just going to share it with you. It goes like this. It's by Edward Markham. It's called Outwitted. He drew a circle. Well, he knows when I start talking about trauma, it's hard to shut me up.
Yeah, look, I grew up with a certain narrative. I was born in Lebanon to Palestinian parents, and the narrative I grew up with was the Palestinian one. And I remember the wars of 67 and 73, and then the occupation and everything that's happened ever since. And one of the first things I learned, and I was really surprised by when I started talking to my Jewish colleagues, was that Jews see themselves as victims, and not just themselves as victims, but Israel as a victim. So that was the complete opposite of my narrative, because as far as I knew, we were the victims, and Israel was this powerful country, militarily, nuclear power, that has defeated the Arabs in every war, and certainly, kicked the Palestinians out of their lands and so on. So how could Israel be seen as a victim? And they explained to me, they said, well, look at it, this tiny country surrounded by over 50 Muslim majority countries, all its neighbors want to destroy it. And to us, Israel is the only place where we can feel safe. Even if we don't live there, it gives us this sense of safety. So, you were saying earlier that, if someone is supporting Palestinian rights, they are accused of being anti-Semitic. But if someone is being supportive of Israel, to a Palestinian or to many of their supporters, then that person equals Zionism, equals racism, equals oppression. They are bad people.
Yeah, so we do have to take a break, and this conversation is so rich. I think we're going to have a part 2 of this conversation, because you're both in difficult positions. I imagine, Raja, when you're talking to Palestinians, like you said, first of all, it must have been difficult for you to change your own narrative. And now you're going to talk to other Palestinians to try to get them to expand their narrative, right? And so I would love to talk about that when we come back, but I really want to talk about your book when we come back as well. I mean, you're talking about things that are included in the book, but I really want to make sure that my audience know how they can get copies of the book, and why you even want them to buy the book. So we're going to be right back for our final segment of the show. This is the Dismantle Racism Show. I'm your host, Reverend Dr. TLC.
What really drives success in business? Introducing Intangify, the show that explores the intangible assets that create value and growth. I'm Matthew Asbell, your host and an attorney focused on innovation. Join me Fridays at noon Eastern to discover how innovation, culture, and other intangibles shape thriving companies from startups to established businesses. We'll share strategies to
Consultant. And on my show, The Conscious Consultant Hour, Awakening Humanity, we will touch upon all these topics and more. Listen live at our new time on Thursdays at 12 noon Eastern Time. That's The Conscious Consultant Hour, Awakening Humanity, Thursdays 12 noon on talkradio.nyc.
You're listening to Talk Radio NYC at www.talkradio.nyc. Now broadcasting 24 hours a day.
We are back in our final segment of the show. We do have a question from YouTube, but I really want you to take a moment, if you would. I know you have an excerpt from your book that you want to read, and if we get an opportunity, we'll come back and be able to answer our question from YouTube. So who's going to read?
Well, we both are, and here's the tome here. It's not a tome, it's not too thick at all. Pretty easy read. So just to kind of maybe to set it up, to kind of tell you the overarch of the book. So the book is in parts, and the first part basically says, how do we come to know? It does all the trauma stuff in plain language. It says that it's really natural for us to resist graphs from our anti-Semitism chapter. And I'll read the first one, and Roger will read the second one. To a Jew, anti-Semitism is a past trauma, a present trauma, and an almost guaranteed future trauma. Anti-Semitism is a thread that runs through the tapestry of Jewish life. It is ever present, foreboding, and certain. It weaves its way, often surreptitiously and silently, through even the happiest of times. It is the monster whose haunting presence breathes down one's neck, refusing to allow any Jew to forget its existence.
You're muted, Raja.
See, there's a conspiracy here. Someone keeps muting me.
Guess
who's behind it?
We want to keep the Palestinians quiet.
Sorry about that. To a Palestinian, anti-Semitism is a muzzle, a weapon to silence, defend, and deflect from, or otherwise discredit critics of Israel's actions. It's a club to clubber the heads of those taking a stand for Palestine, and the shackle that ties down the hands of solidarity. It is the boot that presses down one's neck, choking speech, silencing thought, removing voice, and polarly opposite to each other they are.
Mm.
And if I can just add, even, perhaps more debilitating is that most of this is not conscious awareness.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So when I, as a Jew, say I experience anti-Semitism, I am not considering that it has a negative effect on a Palestinian.
Yeah.
And when a Palestinian resists, a conversation about a reason for Israel to exist because of anti-Semitism, they are almost for certain, completely unaware that that's a re-traumatizing thing for most Jews. Mm. So we are working almost entirely on a subliminal level. Mm. So our first goal is to make it conscious. Mm. That's our first goal, is to say, okay, this is actually there, and existing on a daily level. So really, really important. We want your listeners to know that this is a hopeful, optimistic book. It may not sound like it based on that, but our goal and our belief is that you can move from identity trauma and victimhood to values forward thinking. You can take the Western sort of value of human rights that we all propone, almost all of us propone in this conversation, and apply it to Israel-Palestine in a way that it's never been applied.
Mm-hmm.
You can fight for Palestinian rights and respect and still care about Jews and still realize that Jewish trauma is
without straying into anti-Semitism and Islamophobia. Do you have any, like a real short answer to that? We do want people to pick up the book, but what would you say?
You know, stick to facts. Stick to this, the matter of human rights, respect, and dignity, the things that you listed earlier in this show. And I mean, the first thing you need to do is start listening to understand rather than listening to respond. We've always been accustomed to, I'm listening to what he's saying so I can, rebut his argument and defend mine. Well, that's the first thing you need to, stop doing.
Mm-hmm.
Gotcha.
Well, I think, Jeff, real quick, if you can.
Okay, I'm going to do 10 seconds and I'll tell you how to get the book. Is that okay?
Yes.
Okay. So, well, I'll actually do that first. You can contact us. Our website is thewallbetween.org. You can order the book. There is an order for US orders and for Canadian orders. We are also doing book tours throughout the US and Canada, and we will keep people posted on all of our events and where we are. Really important to get that the book is a means to another end. It is a means to a new conversation. The back of the book has a set of 3 or 4 pages of questions. So speaking out against the occupation is not anti-Semitic or resisting Jews. If you then say Jews, because they're this kind of people, are occupying us, of course that's different. But to speak about injustice is not to invalidate somebody else ever.
Well, Jeffrey and Raja, I want to thank you so much for being on the show. I want to thank you for writing the book, and I want to thank you for being open enough to expand your meta-narrative so that we can create a world that really is about healing and love for one another and equity for all. I want to thank my listeners today. I want to thank those of you who commented on YouTube and on Facebook. I appreciate you joining us. And I want to invite you to stay tuned for the Conscious Consultant Hour with Sam Leibowitz, where he helps you to walk through life with the greatest of ease and joy. May today you tap into that sacred part of you that allows you to make choices that will manifest your greatness. Make it a priority to share love, hope, compassion, and peace today. Be well, be safe, be encouraged. Until next time, bye for now.